When watching, this is Rabbi Moshe Otero with the Ways of Israel, and in this video we're going to be looking at chapter 21 of To Be a Jew, Death and Mourning. Death and Mourning. It's going to be a very brief video covering a little bit about the burial and autopsy. So let's go ahead and get started on page 296. Those of you that are following along, Jewish tradition cherishes life, not death. Torah was given to Israel so that you shall live by the teachings and not die through them. Death has no virtue, since the dead cannot praise the Lord. Psalms chapter 115, verse 17. Nevertheless, Jewish tradition has been realistic about death. For dust you are, and dust you shall return. Notice it says dust, not ashes. Very important. We believe in burial and not in cremation. I have a whole video on that. Genesis chapter 3, verse 19. But the spirit returns to God who gave it. Ecclesiastic chapter 12, verse 7. The end of man is death, says Rabbi Yohanan in Berachot 17a. Simply put, we shall all die. In itself, death is not a tragedy. But what we call tragic death is determined by the untimely nature of death or the unfortunate circumstances surrounding it. When a peaceful death follows a long life which was blessed with good health and vitality of mind and body, the life rich in good deeds, then death cannot be regarded as tragic, no matter how great the loss and sorrow. Blessed is he that has been reared in Torah, and those who toil is in the Torah, and acts as so to please his Creator, and has grown up with a good name and departed with a good name. Concerning him, Solomon said, a good name is better than precious oil, and the day of the death than the day of one's birth. Ecclesiastic chapter 7, verse 1, Berachot 17a. The world we live in is used as a corridor that leads to still another world. This belief in the afterlife, in a world to come, Olam Haba, where man is judged and where his souls continue to flourish, is embedded in Jewish thought. All Israel have a share in the world to come, as we read in Pirkei Avot, Mishnah, also Sanhedrin, chapter 11, verse 1. But the worthier the individual, the greater is his loss to the living. The more he meant to those about him, family, friends, and community, the deeper the grief and the sharper the anguish. Tradition of Jewish observance surrounding death and mourning addresses themselves to maintaining the dignity of deceased and comforting the pain of the mourner. So let's take a look at burial and the autopsy. Religious law and practice relating to death and mourning are based upon two fundamental principles. Number one, kavod, the honor and respect due even to the lifeless human being, or kivud ha'emet. Number two, the concern for mental and emotional and spiritual well-being of the living mourners, and the requirement of extending comfort to them and nehum avelim. The dead must be clothed in white robe, tachrim, after having been carefully washed and cleansed. The simple white garment was instituted in Talmudic times when burials became terribly burdensome and expensive for the masses. To emphasize the equality in death of the rich as well as the poor, the white garment is used. Until the more affluent has usually been buried in richer clothing. The sages were sensitive to the honor of the deceased poor. The male dead also wrapped in a talit, whose fringes are made invalid, symbolically indicating that the earth's requirements are no longer incumbent upon him. The male dead are then wrapped in the talit, whose fringes are made invalid, and symbolically indicating that the earthly requirements are no longer incumbent upon him. Embalming is forbidden. The blood of the deceased is part of himself, which must be also buried and not discarded as waste. For a deceased to be put on to display in an open casket has been traditionally looked upon with dishonoring the body of the person. The sages felt that to be placed on display, enabling not only friends but also foes to march and gaze disparagingly, mocking the body in a very disrespectful way to the deceased, although the intent of this practice in Western culture is an honorable one. Jewish values must discourage it. Cremation, as I made in the other video, is forbidden. Burial must take place in the earth, for from the dust you are, and from the dust you shall return. Genesis chapter 3, verse 19. It does not say from the ashes. Very clear. It's made even more emphatic by the Torah when it says, you must surely bury him. Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 23. When cremation takes place and the ashes are not buried in the earth, but kept in an urn above the ground and scattered over the sea, the family of the deceased is not required to observe the period of Shiva, 7 days of mourning. The autopsy, the consensus of rabbinic ruling, during the past several centuries have been very strong, which prohibited the post-mortem examination as a desecration to the body. However, allowances have been made if there was a reasonable prospect that it would contribute to the saving the life of another patient at hand. If it was thus permitted in the case of hereditary diseases to safeguard the life of surviving relations, and where it was required by civil law of the land because of the foul play, where the general prohibition against autopsy is set aside, it is vital that several safeguards be followed. Number one, only the minimum required tissue needed for the examination should be used. Number two, all parts removed from the body should be returned for its interment. Unless required by law, the autopsy should never be done without the express permission of the family or prior consent of the deceased during his lifetime. Since each case is different and its authoritative rabbinic opinion may differ as what conditions may be met to secure permission, the guidance of one's own rabbi is suggested. Burial must take place as soon as possible following death. To delay interment beyond the next day is permissible only for the honor of the dead and in such as awaiting for the arrival of close family members for distant points, or if Shabbat or festival intervenes. It is also forbidden to bury the dead on the Shabbat. Jews are also forbidden to participate in burial on the first day of the festival. While it's permissible to bury on the second day of the festival, it is only as the actual interment that is permitted. No other violation of the festival is condoned. Under contemporary conditions, it is preferable not to conduct a funeral on either day of the festival so as not to lead to a major desecration of the holiday and thus to the indirect dishonor of the dead. Caring for the dead, preparing them for the burial, watching over them. Shomer, this is why you'll see Shomer hired to attend and be present with the body of the deceased. And the handling of the burial itself is a sacred religious task which only the most pious and worthy members of the Jewish community are called upon to do. The organized community society that concerns itself is called the Sacred Society, Chevra Kadisha. Tearing a garment that one is wearing is a religiously proper way to express grief for the dead. It is the time-honored and ancient sign of grief and mourning among Jews extending back to the biblical times. The garment that is torn is worn throughout the week of mourning called Shiva, except for Shabbat. The cutting a small black ribbon is not religiously an authorized substitution for rendering the garment or kriya. When rendering the garment, the following blessing is said by the mourner. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, dayan ha'emet. You're going to see in many Facebook pages that people will put BDE as the initials of this statement of Blessed art thou, Lord our God, the true judge. Now in our next video, we're going to take a look at the mourning periods and continue with this topic of death and mourning in chapter 21. So stay with us as we continue the series To Be a Jew. Learn to be a Jew. That way you know these laws. And if God forbid this happens, you know what to do. Shalom.